Okay, so today we are starting a new theory of development called Erikson's Psychosocial Theory of Development, okay? And basically, before we start that, I just want to kind of talk about the two theories of development we already covered before this. And the first one was that we covered attachment theory. So we did that one while we were still in school, looking at how a baby's attachment to its mother or its caregiver can pave the way for how they're going to develop emotionally and socially later on. And then we looked at Piaget's cognitive development theory. So the Piaget's cognitive development theory is talking about the different stages of cognitive development. So development of thinking skills, development of mental faculties that happen as a child goes through the different ages of their life. Okay? Now, today we're going to be covering the last model of development, and that is basically called the psychosocial development theory. Okay? So I'll just move on to the next slide. Cool. So before we look at the actual theory and the actual stages of this theory, what we need to think about is what does psychosocial development actually mean? Okay, so what is the actual definition of psychosocial development? Now, if you look at the word psychosocial, it's actually consisted of the word psychological and social. So psychological development, we've already talked about this a lot, but it's about the way that we think, it's about the way that we feel, and the way that we process emotions, okay? So all the stuff that's kind of functions of your frontal lobes, so thinking, decision-making, planning, all that stuff is kind of under psychological development. Also how you deal with stress. So if something stressful happens to you in your life, how do you deal with that? That's a part of psychological development. Social development, those of you who do health, and obviously even like if you think about it from a general knowledge point of view, social development is all about how you are operating as a social being. So how do you interact with other people? How do you basically form relationships with other people? And when you form relationships, can you maintain those relationships? Are you always getting into, for example, fights with people around you or arguments? How do you behave as a member of society? So do you get along with people? Do you obey the laws of society? If you do something wrong, do you take responsibility for your actions? Okay, all that stuff is basically something that comes under this idea of social development. When we put these two concepts together, what that basically brings us to is psychosocial development. And that's the entire idea of Erikson's theory that we're going to be learning about today. Okay? So before we look at Erikson's theory, let's look at who Erikson was, okay? So Erikson was basically a guy, he was a psychologist, and he was really interested in this idea of personality. So in psychology, we have all these different streams and all these different psychology. He was interested in personality psychology. So he was interested in how do people's personalities and their traits and their character, how does that all change as they get older and as they grow up? So in the same way that Piaget was interested in the way people's thinking skills developed as they got older and at different ages, Erikson was interested in what are the different personality challenges, or what are the different personality traits that develop as a person goes through their life, okay? And he came up with 8 stages that happen in a sequence, obviously when you're young to when you get old, that actually explain this idea of psychosocial development, okay? So if we're going to give a nice definition to psychosocial development, we're going to say that psychosocial development refers to the changes that involve both the psychological processes as well as those social experiences that people have with others in their environment. And one of the interesting things about Erikson's theory was that he doesn't just give us stages, but he suggests that at each stage there is a psychosocial challenge or a crisis or a dilemma that is normal or typical for almost everyone in that particular age group to have. So for example, when you're a teenager, almost all teenagers around the world, regardless of where they come from, will experience a very similar psychosocial challenge in terms of their personality, in terms of the environment around them, okay? And so when we go through each of these stages now, I'm going to really emphasize each of the challenges that occur. And actually each of those challenges are the names of each of the slides in the next few bits of this PowerPoint here. Now remember, if you have any questions as we're going through any slide and you don't want to like speak up or unmute yourself, you can just ask me through the chat, okay? And I can answer you through the chat as well. All right, so this is just a little visual kind of diagram showing you what the stages of psychosocial development look like. It's not going to make a whole lot of sense now because we haven't gone through them, but after we finish going through the stages, you can come back to this slide and just see that this is kind of summarizing the names of basically all the challenges that underlie each of the stages of psychosocial development. So let's just start with stage one. So stage one is the first, obviously the first stage of Erikson's psychosocial theory of development, and it involves a conflict or a crisis occurring in terms of trust versus mistrust. So in this stage one, Erikson believed that babies, obviously from the ages of newborn to about 1.5 years old, he believed that babies face this challenge as to whether they should trust their environment and the people around them, or whether they should mistrust. And obviously this isn't just up to the baby to decide, but it's also dependent on how the mother treats the baby, whether the baby's needs are met. So when the baby cries and it's hungry, does the mother then feed the baby, as we see in this picture here? Or does the baby, is the baby just left to cry in their cot or their crib? Obviously, this is also really related to the concept of attachment, which we've already learned about. So whether a baby develops trust or mistrust is actually dependent on how securely their attachment is to their mother or their main caregiver. Okay, so Erikson believed that an infant who does select trust, or who does experience trust in this stage, will grow up to be very emotionally stable, will form good relationships with people, won't pick fights for useless reasons with others, and will usually act in a pro-social way, or in a way that is kind of obeying the laws of society, trying to do good for others. On the other hand, Erikson believed that if an infant was to select mistrust, or in other words, if an infant felt like he or she couldn't trust anyone around them, and thus the infant had formed an insecure attachment, well, then that infant would obviously grow up to be a very anxious and insecure person in terms of their personality. They would lack a lot of confidence, and they would actually show a lot of antisocial behavior later in their life. So they might break a lot of laws, they might engage in criminal behavior, and they might make others around them feel really uncomfortable or really scared or insecure to kind of be around them. Okay, so this is stage one. It's basically the main challenge or the main dilemma here is the infant asking themselves or thinking to themselves, can I trust the people around me, or do the people around me lead me to mistrust them? Yeah, okay, so that's basically the main challenge, the psychosocial challenge for stage one. So then we move to stage two, and obviously stage two will be associated with a different age, okay? In stage two, we're looking at the ages of 18 months, so about 1.5 years to 3 years of age. So the child is now, the infant is obviously older now. In stage two, the conflict or the psychosocial challenge is about this idea of autonomy versus shame and doubt. So what does the word autonomy mean? Autonomy means basically you're able to do something on your own confidently, and you're able to feel like, hey, I'm independent and I can do this by myself. Shame and doubt, you know what shame and doubt is. Shame is when you feel a bit pathetic, you feel a bit useless that you can't do something, or you're doubting yourself. So you have very low self-esteem and very low self-confidence. So Erikson believed that a child will either select autonomy, so they'll become a very autonomous, independent kind of individual, or they will select shame and doubt, okay? And obviously, again, in this stage, because the child is still pretty young, they are not in complete control of what actually happens in this stage again. So you might realize that a lot of, if you've got like little siblings or little cousins who are in this age range of 1.5 to 3 years of age, you realize that they start to want to do things themselves. So rather than their mom or dad trying to do everything for them, they might want to pick up the spoon themselves. They might want to, put on their clothes themselves, okay? All this stuff is basically showing the child's eagerness or the child's kind of motivation to show autonomy, to show independence. So obviously, if the parent doesn't allow the kid to do things themselves, or tells the kid, you're still a baby, you're still so dumb, why would I let you dress yourself up? Why would I let you take the spoon and feed yourself? I have to do it for you. The child will then feel like they are not independent. that they can't be trusted to do things on their own. And for that reason, they will develop this sense of shame and doubt. So they start to doubt themselves, and they start to feel ashamed to actually take the initiative to do things themselves. So again, depending on the kind of environment that the child is raised in this particular age range or age stage, they will either develop autonomy or they will develop shame and doubt. So again, it's kind of important for parents to give children that opportunity to show independence and to show that if they want to do themselves, don't undermine the child, just let them try to eat themselves, or try to eat by themselves, or let them dress themselves, because that's showing that they want to take initiatives and they want to show autonomy. Okay. Erikson also believed that children who had developed trust from the previous stage were also more likely to show autonomy in this particular stage, in stage 2. And that kind of stems from this idea that if you had a secure attachment as a newborn baby and you had a good parental environment there, obviously that is likely to carry on into stage 2. So if your parents were really nice to you in stage 1 when you're a newborn, there's no reason why they should be condemning and undermining and making you feel bad in stage 2, okay? So basically, a really good parental environment and attachment to the caregiver is very important for stage 1 and stage 2 for positive development there. Okay, so the next stage that we then look at, is stage 3. So stage 3, the child is getting even more older now. And it's basically talking about the ages between 3 to 5 years of age. And in this stage, basically, there's a conflict, or the psychosocial crisis that happens here is basically focused on the child either being able to show initiative or not being allowed to show initiative, and thus experiencing guilt. Okay, so guilt and shame are very similar. So a lot of people say that stage 2 and stage 3 are kind of similar in terms of what they are talking about. But it's just that in this stage 3, the child is a little bit older and they've started school in most cases. So obviously, when you show initiative, or when I say you always take initiative, that's a really good thing. Initiative means that you're always trying to think ahead, you're trying to plan ahead, you're trying to behave with purpose. And all of these things require you to be kind of independent as well. Guilt is when you feel bad because you feel like you've overstepped a boundary, or you feel like you've gone too far according to what your parents had expected of you or whatever. Okay, so children in this age group, obviously, because a lot of them have either joined preschool, or they've joined kindergarten, or they've joined actual school, what that basically means is that they are quite active. So physically, mentally, socially, they're really active. They're learning all these new things. Whether or not a child actually develops initiative or guilt in this stage is going to depend upon the caregiver and the family as well, and how they encourage that child to take initiative. So if the family is always doing everything for the kid, never allowing the kid to think for themselves or behave according to what they want to do, sometimes it can actually have a negative impact on the child, especially if the child just wants to do something completely innocent, like play a game, or they genuinely have a question they want to ask the parent, but then the parent's like, that's the dumbest question I ever heard. If the child cannot feel like they have an environment where they can ask any question to the parent without being judged, or they can ask the parent to help them with something, or to play with them or something without being judged or without feeling guilt, then the child will be developing in a very negative way, okay? And they might feel like their ideas whenever they think of something, it's the most stupidest or useless idea because the parent always puts them down for it. So obviously in stage 2, children can also be made to feel guilt by other people. So it's not just talking about parents here now, we're talking about teachers, we're talking about peers, okay? Because the kids have started school, another kid in the class could make the child feel bad as well, okay? If you've got a really mean teacher who's teaching you in grade prep or grade 1, that can actually make he or she can make you feel bad or guilty as well, okay? So obviously in this stage, it's not just parents who can make the kid feel guilty, but even other children, even the child themselves can start to engage in negative self-talk, like, why are you always so stupid? Why do you always ask silly questions? And this is where a lot of self kind of hatred, or the child putting themselves down, can actually begin. So that is basically stage 3, between the ages of 3 to 5 years old, when the child either experiences initiative or they experience guilt. And whichever one they've selected or they've kind of experienced in this stage will pave the way for their future development. Okay, if they choose initiative, future development will be positive. If they choose guilt, future development will be negative. Okay, in stage 4, which is, it's a bit longer, stage 4. Stage 4 is between the entire primary school age. So it's between the ages of 5 to 12 years old. For most people, especially like kids in Australia, this would be between the ages of prep to about grade 6. Okay, so in stage 4, the main psychosocial crisis or the psychosocial conflict is around this idea of industry versus inferiority. Now, industry, when you think about industry, the first thing you think about is probably like working or like a job. And that's what industry means. Industry means the ability to work in a busy, productive, and competent way or professional way. Inferiority, we know what the word inferior means. It's the opposite of the word superior. So inferiority means that the child feels less adequate or less equal to their peers in terms of their achievement, skill, and abilities. So if you're a kid in a grade 4 class, you might be like, okay, I'm in grade 4, but I feel like I'm dumber than the rest of the kids in this class. I feel like I'm not as capable. I feel like I haven't achieved as much. So that's what inferiority means, okay? So obviously, by the end of this stage or by the end of the 12 years of age, the child will either have developed this sense of industry that, yes, I am a productive person, that, yes, I can achieve whatever I set my mind to, or inferiority, where the child feels like, no, I am not an amazing person. I don't have many skills. I don't have the abilities that my peers have. And I'm probably not as good as everyone else. So again, you can see how the choice that you make by the end of stage 4 can actually influence how you're going to later develop into an adult as well. So obviously, the main example here, obviously children don't work. They don't go to jobs. They don't have like employment. So when we talk about industry here, it's the ability to work on stuff that you do in school. So for example, a lot of the time in primary school, you do a lot more projects where you're asked to work independently. You do projects, make posters, make models, all that stuff. So if the child, for example, does a project and they try their best. It might not be 100% perfect, but they try their best. And then their teachers are like, wow, this is amazing, good work. Like this boy in this picture here, he's made a little book or something and he's got an A+ for it, okay? Regardless of what grade you get on that, if the teachers kind of encourage the boy that, yes, you're doing good work, and if the parents are like, hey, you're doing a really good job, I'm proud of you, that child will then be more likely to develop a sense of industry, that yes, they can work in a productive way and make something that's really kind of concrete, that's really kind of their work that they've done themselves. However, if the children's efforts are made fun of, or if the parent is like, you know what, you can't really do this project, just give it to me, I'll do it for you and you can go get an A+, because if you do it yourself, you're probably going to fail. That is going to then put the kid down. That's going to make the kid feel like they can't do anything themselves productively, that they are not competent. And for that reason, the child will develop a sense of inferiority. Okay, so ultimately, it's not only the parents who influence the child's sense of industry, but also teachers. So having an encouraging teacher can promote industry, whereas having a teacher that puts you down or has some grudge against you or has a bias towards you can promote inferiority. Okay, so again, it really it's really determined by more than just the parents now. Also, like I said before, when we're talking about industry versus inferiority, it's not about the kid always having to get an A+. That's not what it's about. As long as the kid knows that I put in my best effort here, even if I get a B+ or a C+ for it, it's okay, because I know that I tried my best. My mum was proud of me. My teachers were proud of me for trying my best, and that's what matters, okay? So industry doesn't mean you get A+ in every single project you do. It just means that you try your best and you do make a good effort to do that. Okay, now we're going to the next stage. The next stage is the stage most of you are currently in. It's the ages between 12 to 18 years of age. So these are kind of like the teenage years, if you are to think about it in terms of a stage in the lifespan. So in this stage, the main psychosocial conflict or the crisis that occurs is identity versus role confusion. So we know what identity is. Identity is the overall image that an individual has of themselves. And role confusion is kind of like we'd say it's kind of similar to this idea of not knowing who you are or not knowing your identity. And in adolescence or in your teenage years, there's a lot of confusion about who am I? Who should I be? Am I being myself like for me, or am I just trying to please other people? And so role confusion is basically this idea that you don't really know who you're supposed to be. So you're kind of experimenting with a lot of different phases in your life. You're experimenting with a lot of different identities or personalities or whatever. Okay. Now, it's normal for most adolescents to feel a bit of role confusion, but for some people, it actually gets to an extreme where they start to get involved in crime because they think that's who they should be. Or they start to maybe paint their whole face and go full goth because they think that that's who they should be. Okay. For most teenagers or adolescents, though, it's less intense. Okay. Maybe there's a bit of issues where they don't know who they are, but then for the most part, it kind of settles towards the later year of like 17 to 18 years. All right, so in this stage, the individual is obviously maturing. They've gone through puberty. They've maybe moved schools. They've maybe fallen out with certain people and made new friends, whatever. So they start to see the world in a very different way, and they become more conscious of how they see themselves as well as how others might see them. So there are some things that you look at primary school kids and then you're like, oh my God, why would they sing in front of the whole family at this event? That's so embarrassing. But for that primary school kid, they don't care about how the people see them. They might just be happy to be given that attention. Whereas for an adolescent, the adolescent might be more like, oh my God, I'm going to be so embarrassed. What if someone, I don't know, films it and puts it on TikTok or whatever? I don't know. Okay. So basically, as a teenager, you become more self-conscious. Because of that self-consciousness, you actually start to be more conscious of your identity, okay? Because your identity is who you are and you don't want others to mock you or laugh at you. So Erikson basically thought that if a person had successfully come through the other stages, choosing the positive option in each one, so choosing trust, autonomy, initiative, and industry, then in stage 5, they would also be more likely to choose the positive option, which is to choose identity, okay? Where they're not confused about who they are. Now, according to Erikson, this whole idea of rebellious teens, or, she's an adolescent and that's why she's rebellious, or, the fact that our teenagers are always different from every other person is kind of, that's what Erikson believed was linked to this idea of role confusion, that adolescents or teenagers who go off the rails or who become rebellious or who run away from home are demonstrating this kind of concept of role confusion, that they chose the negative option in stage 5. And that's why their behaviors are like that, or their behaviors like breaking the law, running away from home, can be explained by them selecting the role confusion option for this psychosocial crisis. Okay. So by the end of this stage, you're either choosing an identity, you have some kind of rough identity there, and you know who you are and what your values are, or you're choosing role confusion, which is the negative option, where you don't know who you are, you don't know what people expect of you, you don't know where you're heading in life, etc. Okay, so that's what stage 5 is about. Stage 6 is basically your kind of early adulthood. So between the ages of 18 to 25, it's basically talking about the psychosocial crisis is intimacy versus isolation. So in stage 6, or in this age range, a lot of people are kind of looking for, I wouldn't say, yeah, we could probably say they're looking for love, but they're kind of more looking for someone that they can share their experiences with, that they can care about. So it could be marriage, it could be just having a partner or whatever, a boyfriend or girlfriend, all that stuff. So in this stage 6, the person has to either choose this thing of intimacy or isolation. So they've met someone that they can share their experiences with and who can care for them, or isolation, whereas they have to live alone or be alone, isolated, without anyone to care for or share their lives and their experiences with. Okay, so obviously we know that between the ages of 18 to 25, that's the age where most people start to get into a committed relationship. Most people will get engaged or married within this age range, and they start to look for kind of more romantic relationships outside of family and friends. Okay, Erikson believed that if this stage could not be reached earlier, like if you didn't get a boyfriend or girlfriend when you were a teen, in order to actually get a proper, meaningful romantic relationship in this stage, you needed to first know who you are. So, like in those TV shows where I don't know, I feel like it's such a cliche when the girl or the guy is like, how can I start a relationship? How can I know another person so well when I hardly know myself? And it's like so dramatic. That's basically what Erikson was saying, that if you don't know yourself and you don't feel secure in who you are and confident in who you are, you can't possibly think about developing or getting into a committed, intimate relationship with another person. Okay, so obviously, according to Erikson, intimacy is not just about the whole romantic side of things. It's also about like relationships between two close friends. Okay, so like I was saying before, it's not just about marriage, even just having a partner who you can talk to and share your experiences with. So two people who fought in the war together can actually have a close relationship that actually extends the bounds of just being close friends, because they've served together, they've seen people die together, and they've really supported each other through all those hard times. Okay, so it's not just about romantic relationships, but for the majority of people, yes, it will be about romantic relationships and love and all that stuff. Okay, so stage 6, the psychosocial crisis is, do I find someone, fall in love and have a partner to share the rest of my life with? That's the positive. Or do I end up alone? That's the negative. Okay, and the last two stages are talking about the later stages of your life. So 25 to 65 is generativity versus stagnation. Generativity comes from the word generate, which means to make something. Generativity means that you're kind of worried about how the future generations will live, how your kids will grow up in this world. Stagnation is when you're kind of stagnating. Stagnating means that you're kind of just lying there, but you don't really have this sense of activity or this sense of passion anymore for what you're doing or what the future generation should be able to have. Okay, so obviously Erikson believed that as people reach the later ages of this stage, so in their 50s or 60s, they start to think less about themselves and more about how they can pass down the world to their kids or their grandkids, so as you can see in this picture here. And this is when a lot of old people start to donate to like climate change funds, or they start to donate to building schools because they want to leave a good world for the future generation. For most people though, especially I think when we're talking about like, you know, the majority of people in the world, having children is the best way they can contribute to this generativity. So when you have a child and you raise that child well, and you teach that child to respect the environment and respect the world and do good, when that child grows up and if they build new schools or if they, donate to different charities and things, that's helping the world. And as a parent, you've actually raised a child who is contributing to generativity in the world. On the other hand, if you simply don't get married, you simply don't have a kid, you don't adopt a kid, whatever, you just kind of lie there just all worried and self-absorbed in your own self and your own kind of gains and your own kind of selfish desires, that can then lead to stagnation. So you're not making your mark on the world, you're not leaving anything behind that might make a positive change to the world. Okay, it doesn't have to be kids, by the way. It can just be even as simple like you developing a new school before you die. Okay, but again, it's just a matter of, are you just self-absorbed with your own needs, or are you actually thinking about the world after you die? Okay, so some people also show generativity by working in fields like they become a doctor, they become a paramedic, they become a nurse, they become a teacher, a lawyer, a social worker who saves kids who are getting abused. All that stuff can also contribute to generativity. Okay. So that's stage 7. And the last stage is obviously the very last stage of the theory. It's talking about the ages of 65 and above. So 65 and above is obviously the age at which most people are kind of looking back on their lives. They're pretty sure their lives are probably going to come to an end at some point, and they've probably already had kids, probably have grandkids. And they're looking back at their life and they're thinking, okay, I've lived for 65 years, or I've lived for 70 or 75 years. Am I happy with the kind of life that I lived? Or am I satisfied with the kind of life that I lived? And basically, can I then, die satisfied, or died in a way that I am basically feeling like I have left my mark on the world and that I did everything I could and that I don't have any regrets? Or do you live a life of despair where you then look back at your life and you have feelings of hopelessness, you feel regret, you feel as though you didn't live the life you wanted, or your life has gone to waste? Okay, so that's stage 8, and that's the main psychosocial crisis that happens in the stage 8, which is integrity versus despair. Okay, so a person who develops integrity, that's the positive option here. Integrity is you feel satisfied when you look back on your life. A person who develops integrity in this stage might not have had a perfect life, but they still feel satisfied. They still feel content with how their life has turned out. And I'll give you an example of that. So this man in this picture who's looking at this photo album and laughing, maybe he was abused as a child. But then when he got into his teenage years, he was able to escape his abusive parent. He was able to go and do his studies. He was able to get a good job. He was able to meet his, lovely wife. He was able to have a few kids, and those kids were able to make him feel proud. I don't know. Okay, he was able to maybe establish a few charities in his name, or he was able to contribute to existing charities. So even though a person might not have a perfect life, they can still develop integrity, okay? Integrity is just about how satisfied you are overall with your whole life. A person who develops despair in this stage might feel bitter, okay? They might feel like it's too late to do anything they want. They might feel a lack of closure. So they might reach the age of 65 or 70 and just be like, you know what, I'm not really happy with the kind of life I lived. I feel like my life has just gone to waste. And they don't really feel like they're ready to, die. They feel like there's a lot of things that they missed out on doing in their lives. Okay, so Erikson believed, however, that for some people in this age, for all people in this age range, some despair would be unavoidable. So even if you're really happy as a 65 or 75-year-old person, you might be like, you know what, I barely get to see my kids anymore. I barely get to see my grandkids anymore. No one visits me anymore. So you might still feel some despair, but we have to also remember that sometimes when you're in your 65 or 75, in that really later age of life, it's not just your life that you're thinking about now. You're also thinking about your kids' lives. You're thinking about your grandkids' lives, okay? So what Erikson believed was that even if this man in this picture is happy and he's satisfied with his life, maybe, sadly, his daughter developed cancer at the age of 35, and she died, in the last 2 or 3 years. And maybe for that reason, even though he's satisfied with his life, he feels despair on her behalf. So he feels what Erikson described as secondhand despair. So even though this man is happy with his life, he's so upset and in despair that his daughter had to die before him, or that his daughter's kids are now living with the single parent, which is the dad. Okay, so again, we can feel despair on behalf of people around us, okay, and other people for this reason can affect us in that aspect. Okay, so that's basically what we are covering for today. And there's just one more slide that I'm just going to skim through on the criticisms, okay? So when we're talking about the criticisms of Erikson's theory, what we're really suggesting is that Erikson's theory was really good. It makes a lot of sense, but it does have its criticisms, okay? So one criticism was that there was a lack of experimental evidence to support his theory. Most of Erikson's observations weren't conducted through actual experiments, but were just conducted through case studies. So studying a bunch of teenagers in Australia and comparing that to a bunch of teenagers in America, okay? Some of the key terms in Erikson's model, like trust or generativity. Trust is easy to define, but what about generativity? A lot of you might not know what that is off the top of your head, and they can be difficult to define or to test in an experimental setting. Furthermore, Erikson's model doesn't look into the different gender influences. So are males more likely to have identity issues, or are females more likely to have identity issues or role confusion in teenage years? Okay, so most of the case studies that Erikson received were actually based on males. So can we actually apply every stage and what happens in every stage to females, okay, from the model? Certain stages can be inaccurate as well. For example, identity and intimacy. They say intimacy should be between 18 to 25 years old, but we know that a lot of people maybe find the love of their life when they're 16 or 17 or 15 years old, okay? So again, certain stages can overlap. Finally, he believed, one of the problems with Erikson's theory was he doesn't talk about the impact of work. So we know a lot of teenagers, when they turn 15 or 16, they go to start to work in Macca's or KFC or Kmart or Coles. And there's no kind of explanation of how that might impact their personality development and how that might impact their identity. And so we know that that's a major influencer on identity, but Erikson didn't make any reference to that in the identity versus role confusion stage of his model. Okay, so those are the main criticisms. Maybe know at least 2 or 3 from this slide for any kind of SAC or exam situation. Okay, so that's all we're covering for today. The next few slides on this PowerPoint are just kind of activities. Maybe you can do those in your free time. But basically the work that you need to submit for this week is you just need to complete the learning activities for this particular spread. And those will be on your checklist. Okay, the homework checklist that's under the tab.
It doesn't have 5.28.
Sorry, your book?
On a checklist, it doesn't have 5.28. So what questions do we do for this spread?
There should be I don't know, because you guys, some of you have different books. There should be one question you're doing where you're filling out a table. I think that should be 5.28. And the question is just normal questions.
So which questions am I saying do we do for this spread? Just the first one or what?
It should be on the checklist, Sam. Let me check. Hold on.
It doesn't say on a checklist you gave us.
Does it say all questions?
It doesn't have 5.28. It doesn't have the actual spread on the checklist.
That should be the case. Hold on, let me see. What are the questions that are there for the one before the table?
The first question for 5.28 is the table.
The table? What about, is there a learning activity before that?
Miss?
Yeah.
When did you give the table out, the homework?
I think I gave it out in one of the last lessons. I put it up on the file.
Because Miss, is it up on Schoolbox? Because I wasn't here the last 2 weeks.
It's on the Schoolbox, under the files. Okay, you can download it from there. It should be you guys should be doing questions 5. So if you've got the old book, it's 5.22 and 5.23. If you've got the new book, it should be 5.27 and 5.28.
Oh, whoops, I just saw that.
Yeah, so it's all questions. There's not many, I'm just giving you all of them to do. Okay. All right, everybody. So if you have any more questions, put them in the social stream, because I've got another class now that I have to go to. And I will see you guys, inshallah, next week. Okay. If you have any questions, just put them in the social stream. I'll come to them.
Bye, Miss.
Everybody, bye.
All right, thanks.
No worries.
Stay safe.
Thank you.